Okay, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the Benicia Unified School District Governing Board meeting to order. Let's see, this is June 18th, 2020. So just a reminder, in compliance with Executive Order N29-20 and N35-20 issued by Governor Newsom on March 12th and 21st respectively. This meeting will be live streamed and recorded via the BUSD YouTube channel. Also, any comments will be sent to us through the Google form that was on the website before, linked to number 12. And those comments should have been turned in at the start of the meeting. Going to start with the fact that there's no information from closed session to be reported out, and we are ready to begin. We'll start with the highlights, and I'll refer to our superintendent. Nope, let me skip that back 1 second. I need an approval of the agenda first. After the approval of the agenda.
I'll make an approval of the agenda as written.
Do I have a second?
I'll second. Okay.
Thank you. All those in favor of approving the agenda say aye.
Aye.
Hearing none, the agenda is approved. Would everybody please join me now in reciting the pledge? Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. Okay, we'll start with reports. Dr. Young?
I do not have a report for you this evening. It's kind of a rare event for me, but we have a full schedule, so I thought I'd keep us moving along.
All right, thank you. Do any board members have a report tonight? Okay, I will just share. I sat on Dr. Beatson's committee this week for reopening of schools. I will say it's amazing. We're going to see some exciting data, and wow, what a team she has got. There's like 20 gazillion of us on the team, so amazing group. So thank you to them. With that said, I am going to move on to comments from the public, of which there are none. So I'm going to move past that into the consent calendar. All matters listed under the consent calendar are considered by the board to be routine and will be approved by the board in one motion. There will be no discussion on these items unless members of the board, staff, or public request specific items to be pulled and discussed. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda consent calendar?
I move that we approve the consent calendar as written.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the consent calendar is approved. Okay, we're going to move on to discussion items. And then there are no discussion items, so we're going to move on to the consent action items. 13.1 is consideration and approval of the award of a contract to Liberty High School and the district office fire alarm. Mrs. Egan?
Hey, good evening, everyone. So we took the fire alarm project to bid. This is part of our bond projects, and they, just as a reminder to everybody, are funded by Proposition Major S for our local property taxes, and that restricts that the monies can only be used on our facility improvements. So the fire alarm projects were priority one, and we are really pleased that we've gotten the work done at all of the other schools. This is our last site to upgrade our fire alarm systems. We took the project to public bid, which we're required to, and we pre-qualified all of the contractors. We were happy with the pool of contractors that we had. We had 3 contractors, and they have all bid on projects for us prior. And the contractors that bid were Bachman and Woody, Pacific Sound and Signal, and Vanden Boss Electric. The highest bid was Bachman and Woody at $807,350. The second lowest bid was Pacific Sound and Signal at $603,100. And then the lowest bid was to Van and Boss Electric at $563,500. The low bid is right in line with what the engineer's estimate was, and also Van and Boss Electric has been really, we've had great experiences with them. They did Matthew Turner, which is just finishing up, Joe Henderson, Mary Farmer, and Robert Semple. The other projects, well, we initially intended that this project would be done similar to Matthew Turner and Joe Henderson, in that we would do the work on weekends and evenings and off school hours. With the circumstances as they are, we reevaluated how can we get this done, but also just still have complete separation between the contractors on the site and the, if we go back to school, the occupants of the buildings. So the schedule that we set it is that they can work in Liberty High School. They would start work right away. They would have to, no matter where they are at in their work, they have to stop all work within Liberty and the community day buildings and in June's program on August 6th. And that way it would give separation between their work inside the spaces and give maintenance a chance to come clean, and also time when no one's in those spaces before any occupants return. The existing system will be up and running while they install the new, but the new system, then they would return over Thanksgiving break and over winter break to complete the connection to put the new system in place. This project does also cover Liberty, which it covers the DO. We would do work inside the DO so a lot of people right now are working remotely, and I've reached out to all the departments and everybody was amenable. A lot of our work, it's like, well, we might need to be in, let's say, the business office for a week or whatever. If the business office has certain days that they need to be in there, we'll schedule it off. But otherwise, I might ask, like, department by department, will coordinate it to say, can you guys work remotely during this week while the contractor's there? And that way they can install the physical devices in that office space. Again, same kind of protocol where they would complete that section of their work in the space. They would leave. There would be empty time in the space. Then maintenance would come and do cleaning, and then the occupants and users could return. There are portions of their work that are exterior trenching. There's trenching from the district office. Well, it's from Liberty, actually, along the side of the fields all the way back to Community Day, and then also to the daycare buildings. And that could be done at any time because we can maintain separation from all the other people who are on the site. So we feel like that's a pretty good plan as best we could come to formulating it and still trying to get stuff done. The contract includes a clause that says, we don't know what's going to happen, and if we have to adjust schedule, then that's not a cause for increased cost. So they agreed to that as part of their contract. And it also allows us to adjust time as we need to. So all in all, we feel that this came out as good as we could have hoped for. And staff recommendation is to award the bid to the low bidder, Van and Boss Electric, in the amount of $563,500.
Okay, thanks, Roxanne. Does anyone have any questions for Roxanne? Okay, then can I call for a motion to award the contract to Van den Bosch Electric?
I move that we award the contract for the alarms to Van den Bosch Electric.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none. The contract will be awarded to Van den Bosch Electric for Liberty and DO. Thank you, Roxanne.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to 13.2, consideration and approval of the following Liberty High School courses for English. Dr. Beatson.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. I am really tickled to bring back to you tonight an updated course outline for English grades 10 through 12 at Liberty High School. Last board meeting, you approved a curriculum change for them to use Study Sync, which is a very highly rated English curriculum. And so the teachers and the principal, Miss Lewis, worked together to then revamp and update the course outline to reflect the changes of the curriculum. And so tonight I'm bringing forth to you the English 10 through 12 course outline. The teachers will adjust and dive into that depending on which students they get in their classes. And so I'm recommending that you approve the English 10-12 course, updated course outline for Liberty High School.
Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Beatsy?
I didn't have a question, but I had a comment. I loved the array of readings, the combination of fiction and classical readings. I
Yep.
thought was really fantastic.
Great. The Study Sync program is really well done and highly rated. It's got and Stephanie shared this last time as well. A lot of multimedia approaches as well, which really engage students, and it's a lot of current information and then bridging it back. So the teachers were super excited about it and really ready to get on and sort of organize their year about what it would look like in their course. So thank you for that feedback.
Okay. Anybody else? All right, do I have a motion to approve the English 10-12 coursework for Liberty High School?
I'll make a motion to approve the coursework proposed for Liberty High School.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the coursework will be approved. Thank you very much. I'm going to move on to 13.3, which is an update and consideration of approval of the returning to school, the feedback and some draft models. Dr. Beatson again.
Excellent. I'm going to share my screen with you. Oh, I can just open it this way big. Whoops. Okay. So we're very excited to bring to you tonight. Both Mrs. Rice and I will share information about the survey feedback that we received, and then the current work and thinking of the returning to school design team. And inside of that will be some recommendations for approval for the work and the preliminary schedules of back to school. The caveat being a lot can change between now and August, but this is the direction we're heading. And so we're looking to make sure from you that we're heading in the direction that you all can support and approve. So I think I just said all of this. The other piece in this presentation, whoops, is we wanted to share with you the work we've done around health and safety and what that would look like as well. And again, since this was put out, there have been some changes, as you know, in Solano County and in the state in terms of mask. So we may have to make some adjustments as we go forth and we hear more information on that. So I'm going to turn this over to Mrs. Rice right now to share a couple of the highlights before we get into the other parts of the presentation.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Beatson. I wanted to wrap up, we've shared week by week the highlights of what was going on in our distance learning for 2019-2020. And this was just a highlight of how each and every one of our schools made the end of the school year from graduation, promotion, and I will see you next year celebration special. And I think it just kind of captures the Benicia Unified way of just really going that extra mile for our kids. So it's just a beautiful job. And then as Dr. Beatson is going to go into more depth, and Mrs. Frucci shared that we have that design team now planning for our 2020-2021 school year. One of the components is eliciting feedback from our stakeholder group, our parents. And we put out 3 different surveys. The first one here is for our elementary families, and we had over 1,200 responses. And the question we started with was, if things were as it is currently, would you choose virtual learning only, no in-person learning in the fall? And about 22% of our families said if it's like it is now, they would choose virtual learning only. And we followed with the question, what would it take to have or what would it take to help you feel safe to send your students back? And that was vaccine, CDC saying it was safe. And then, we had both sides of the coin, either no masks required for their children or the opposite, which was wearing masks along with appropriate health screening and sanitation and social distancing. And then a strong support for one small group cohort or smaller class sizes. And then we also wanted to ask the question, would childcare be an obstacle if we were not back at 100% capacity? And 43% of our families said yes, childcare would be an obstacle. And that Dr. Beatson will tap into, but we are currently working with June Regis from our CDU program to make some alterations in what we can offer from Benicia Unified, as well as trying to give parents that information so they can make arrangements with their daycares as well. And then we proceeded to talk about hybrid models. So bringing kids back in 25% capacity and 50% capacity. And both models, we landed in the 85th and 83rd percentile, saying parents would feel confident to send their kids back to school.
Stephanie, can I just stop you for a second on
Absolutely.
that one? So on the parents with the daycare, so 23% maybe, so really it's about 65% of our parents are going to need daycare of some kind?
Possibly.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, correct.
Thank you.
Then with the hybrid models, we asked about different models, such as an AM/PM model or alternating days. And then we also talked about coming one day per week. And the most popular of those were the AM/PM model at 59% and alternating days at 57%. But if you look at the 6 ranking at the most preferred model, AM/PM came out at 37% there. So it's the top ranked. And then teasing out the alternate days, we had the Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday choice, and the every other Monday, Wednesday was preferred at 30% to 17%. And those are important details that we're teasing out to continue to make our model and refine it. All right, on to our middle school. We had 725 responses from our middle school families. And again, almost identical to elementary, about 23% saying that they would choose virtual learning only. And again, very similar responses as to what would help them to feel safe to send their children back. We don't have a daycare program for middle school, but we also wanted to see if additional availability to campus facilities, meaning if students were coming even like at an AM/PM type of a schedule, would they need to possibly utilize the library, etc., for either connectivity to Wi-Fi or just a space before they were picked up. And we had 23% saying yes and 22% saying maybe to that response. And then the hybrid models, again, we're in the 80th percentile of our families feeling confident with either bringing 25% or 50% of our students back at a time. And we discussed either 2 times per week, which was the most popular with our families at 67%. And then we teased that down again, whether it would be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or a Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday, every other day. And the every other day model was preferred 31% to 16%, with 31% saying either way. And then also our AM/PM model coming daily was 44% response. And then we also surveyed our 2 high schools, and we received 846 responses, again, right around the 20th percentile, choosing that virtual learning only in the fall. And then again, that question about needing availability to other campus facilities. We had 20% saying yes and 20% saying maybe, so around 40% as a possibility.
Sorry.
You're good. And then we asked the question of hybrid models, and again, right in the 80th percentile. And the alternating days and the flex schedule were the two top choices, and they were really close at 72% or 70%. Alternating days, they preferred again Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday instead of back to back. And then that flex schedule is something with students having more choice built in as far as a hybrid of online learning and some in-person learning. And then we also asked for feedback or other things they would like us to consider. And at the top feedback for all levels was teacher instruction, if we're in that virtual learning model, is vital, right alongside of teacher feedback. So just that connection and the instructing going on. It was mentioned several times that a sixth grade orientation, whether virtual or in person, is necessary. I do know our middle school has already sent some things out to our sixth graders. I've seen some videos by the web leaders already trying to acclimate them, and the fifth grade teachers, shared it out through their Google Classroom. So they're already starting that. Parents, really want to know what's going on. So we're trying as a district to be as quick and proactive, but also working with, things are ever changing. We have the feedback of mental health. Social emotional learning support is needed, whether we're in person or virtually. And again, it was said over and over that we need more connections happening. It was stated via Zoom, but I think it's just any type of that face-to-face, virtual or not connection. It was mentioned that the communication that was sent out by the district and sites were much appreciated, and it was the more communication, the better, families were saying. It was asked that there could be consideration for siblings to have that same schedule, and then having consistent curriculum practices across grades and subjects across our district. And then a consideration of possibly having tutor opportunities available, whether you're in person or not. So thank you. I just want to say thank you, families. There was great feedback. I read through every comment, and we're taking all that into consideration. Dr.
And just to give a plug to Stephanie and Lisa, they did the survey in English. We sent it out in Spanish. And we had our site leaders and some of our teacher volunteers doing some polling and calling to make sure that we had cross-representation from across the district. And I know that Ms. Corona is working on a special survey that will go out to special ed families in the very near future with specific information about needs that they feel like they have to make sure next year is successful for their students as well.
I have a question, Stephanie. Thank you for all your work on this. The team put a lot of work into getting these numbers and percentages. I wanted to find out how many families are in our district and what percentage actually participated in this survey.
I actually don't know off the top of my head how many families. We have around 1,100 students at the middle school, but one family could have multiple kids.
Right.
I don't have that exact number. That's something I could get back to you, but we have at elementary sites, around 450, between 400 and 500 students total for our elementary, and we had 1,200, over 1,200 responses. So
3/4.
Yeah,
probably. I have a question on your slide for elementary school. I was looking carefully at the numbers, and I realized that it looks skewed. And I don't know if you guys realize, but it's a simple error, I think, because you forgot the 100 responses in the first slide, and it went right to 200. So if you look at the differences between
This one?
that one, the first one, it goes from 0 to 200 on the left. But on the one on the right, it goes 0 to 100, then 200. So you have the
it's
bar
just
chart.
it's just how the graph is made. But if you look at the actual numbers in the bar and the percentages, that's the numbers that I took. So it's just how the bars are set up in.
It was just the only one like
just the range. Yeah.
It just was the only one like that. The other ones aren't like that. So I was just curious if there was something else that I was not seeing.
I'll double check, but as far I don't believe so as far as what when I check the numbers and the percent, if that makes sense.
If you look at the intervals are consistent, 0, 200, 400, 600, and then it goes by 100s in the second one. But they are consistent intervals, which is good.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and so just back to the response rate to continue, that is a really high percentage of responses, which means it's really just, I can't ever say those two words, statistically significant. So it was, you can generalize based on the amount we got as if everyone had returned the surveys.
That was a good question, Sherry.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Keep me on my toes.
Okay. I think, Stephanie, is this where I'm supposed to take over?
Yes.
Okay. It's funny not doing it in person because I can't see her. Now I'm going in the wrong direction. So we're going to go through again, just to remind everyone of the planning process that we used, and then some of the outcomes from there. So we put together a design team. We have met, I don't know, I think I was counting upwards of 16 hours probably over the last few weeks to look at the data, to gather feedback, and to put preliminary plans in place. And you can see that we had a representation from every single school site, from the district office, from teachers, from parents, and Ms. Ferrucci was a board representative on the committee as well. We always measured our work back against our district vision, which we know really well, and are looking at ways to use this as an opportunity to continue to further these characteristics that we want to see in our Benicia graduates. So even though it's a different learning time, it doesn't mean that we can't find some new and innovative ways to do business of school. In addition to that, the team put together some key drivers and guiding principles that also helped us drive this work. Number one being safety and wellness for all students, staff, and families. And so while there were many, and continue to be many recommendations put forth by the state superintendent, by the governor, our public health officials, we want to be able to incorporate as many of them as possible that is feasibly manageable for us. We also knew that student voice and choice, creating as many authentic and meaningful learning opportunities as possible, continuing, and we heard in Ms. Rice's feedback that quality instruction is vital, and it's individualized, flexible, and innovative, and then a commitment to equity. So continuing to ensure that we, as much as possible, provide really high instructional opportunities and close those learning gaps for students and make sure that everyone has connectivity. So I'm in the process of putting together a formal plan that will be able to sit on our website. It's not complete yet, but I have lifted some components of that to bring to you this evening. And so one of the things that we know is that when schools resume in the fall, which they will look different. And here are some things that we are thinking of. It is highly likely that every student won't be able to be on campus at the same time if we're going based on the information that we have right now. And so I shared with you last time that we are putting together a phased-in approach, and I'll share more information about that with you in a minute. I just really want to emphasize that the phased-in approach isn't necessarily linear. we may enter at phase 3, we may have to go back to phase 2. It all depends. And so even though it's written in a linear way, by no means is it meant to be like we're at 1, then we go to 2, then we go to 3. Hopefully that happens, but it may or may not. Or we may be able to enter further along that continuum. And then movement along those phases is going to be always taking into consideration what the recommendations from our public health and Department of Ed and Solano County Office of Education are telling us when it's safe to move from phase to phase. So here are the models. The model 1 would be we continue or phase 1 full-on virtual learning, and the second phase would be kind of in 2 parts. It's this hybrid idea, but 2A would be if we only can bring back very small groups of children. So at one point when we were opening up the county, remember people could get together in groups of about 10. And then that expands to you can have groups of about 20. And so model 2A is when we can only have 6 or 7 kids, a quarter of the kids in the class at a time. That would be 2A, which means they'd be learning from home some of the time, and we'd be able to bring a quarter of the kids on campus at a time. 2B is about 50% of the kids. So we can have kids in bigger groups. And then models 3 and 4 are really about in-school learning. So everybody can come back at one time. The third step in this is everybody can come back, but we can't do assemblies. We can't have all the kids out at recess at one time, so we can't do those really big gatherings. And model 4 is what we're all waiting for, which is everything's back to normal. We can do assemblies, we can do field trips, we can have big groups. So that's kind of like we're through all of this. The other thing that we're really working hard to find a way to do and do really well is to offer some type of virtual academy. And that would be for students who cannot, for whatever reason, return to school in August. And so if we're doing a hybrid model and they're not able to attend the in-school components, how do we keep their learning going? And they choose to do virtual 100%. And right now, you just heard those statistics, about 20% of our population is thinking that might be an option for them. And so a really important piece about that virtual academy is we want to keep our kids here in Benicia Unified School District. And so we want to find ways to meet all the needs of all the students. So on the next slide, I'm going to open up for you the actual schedule templates that we're looking at. And I just want to reiterate, they are a draft. And they may need to change based on items that have to be negotiated, based on new health requirements, based on wherever we may be come August with the virus. And so this is our best thinking at the time. And what we're looking to get from you is an approval that, yes, we're on the right track, knowing that we probably will need to make some adjustments as we go. But this is where we are at this particular moment in time. And the other piece, just to note, until we fully develop this virtual academy, we may not be able to offer all courses through this. So if a family chooses that, and I'm thinking particularly at a secondary level, there may be some electives that we just don't have the capacity to do virtually. And so people will just need to know that going up front. And so on this slide, this is a hyperlink. Oh, good, this is working. I never can tell when you're here. Now, I don't know if you can see this. Let's see if I can make it bigger. Okay, here we go.
Very colorful.
Very colorful. I have to say, we've been meeting with the assistant superintendents around Solano County. We get together once a week, and one of my colleagues made this template because everybody's doing some sort of phases and planning for multiple scenarios, which is really what this is. And we all loved it. And so now everybody's that we look at across the county is looking sort of like this. And so this is draft elementary. And so, and I apologize because I've gone from model to phases, and we'll land on the right word. But number 1 is all at home learning. So this is virtual learning. Something happens over the summer and we can't, for whatever reason, open our doors to students. what would that look like? We wouldn't have students, so there would be 0 days where kids were at school, 5 days where kids are at home. So numbers of groups of students in classes and at recesses is a non-issue. We'd offer PE and music in Zoom lessons and large events. None of that makes any, it doesn't apply in this model. And then what would learning from home look like? We'd have some synchronous and some asynchronous learning happening Monday through Thursday, whole group and small group opportunities. And that we would have really more rigorous instruction happening. Either a video is posted and then teachers follow up with the classroom instruction, or the teacher might be doing the live teaching right then and there. One of the big shifts, and this is based on feedback that we had gotten last time, was really focusing even more on essential standards, but in essential areas. And so what we're recommending through all of this until we're kind of back open full time is that TK to 3 really spends their time focusing on English language arts. So your reading, your writing, your phonics, mathematics, and social emotional learning. And because if we don't have the kids all the time, for our 6 hours a day, that we really have to prioritize those littles from TK to 3. That's our biggest charge. And then when we get to 4th and 5th grade, we start to do some science and social studies unit swapping out. But again, really focusing on making sure that we build that strong foundation in literacy and mathematics before they head off to the middle school. And then across the bottom, support services and special education would happen if we're in virtual learning for the whole time. They would continue to work via Zoom and other platforms. And then I'm not going to take you through every single one of these. I just wanted to kind of show you how to read these charts. So 2A is that when we can only bring a quarter of the kids in to school. But I really want to take you to 2B, because my fingers are crossed that we'll be able to start in August bringing 50% of our kids back. That's where I'm hoping we can enter this model if nothing goes terribly south over the summer. And so if we look at that, the elementary proposal is that kids would come either in the morning or in the afternoon. So a morning and afternoon session, which would mean that kids would come for 4 days. And so they would have 4 contacts with their classroom teacher. They'd either be in the morning group or in the afternoon group, which would put our student count between 12 and 16 students in a classroom at a time. And on a campus, we'd have approximately 250 students, so about half the student body. And then just things that we were thinking about. Kids would have to go out in their classes for recess. We wouldn't be able to use the play structure right now because of cross-contamination. Likely PE and music would continue to be Zoom lessons and the thinking behind that is those can get scheduled outside of the students' time in school. So if the students are only in school for 2.5 or 3 hours in person, and we really want to focus on that English and math and social emotional learning, we can add time for them with the teacher, PE and music through Zoom outside of that, so that we spend the bulk of that time there. Fridays would continue to be independent learning for students, and teachers would have that time to continue to collaborate. We'd have our staff meetings. We'd offer professional learning time. There may be some Zooming with teachers to do some whole class, like try to bring both halves of the class together on Fridays to do some class culture building. And the other piece for lunch would be kids that were on campus in the morning with their teacher and leaving would do a grab and go lunch. And then I believe that Miss Courtney would be able to continue to provide central lunch distribution at the 3 sites. So we'd be able to continue like what we're doing right now. So if I want to just walk you through the day of, say, a 2nd grader. I'm a 2nd grader. I'm assigned to the morning session. I come to school. I do my 2.5 or 3 hours with the classroom teacher, focus on my essential standards. I take my lunch, and either I'm picked up by a daycare or a parent or someone who's coming to pick me up, and I have sort of homework based on what I did in the morning. So I might have a math page. I might have some reading I have to do at home, and I might have to finish a piece of writing. But there wouldn't be any Zoom instruction, because then what happens is the teacher's getting her second or his or her second group of students coming in. So there wouldn't be a Zoom instruction in the afternoon. If I'm that same student and I don't have someone that can come pick me up, we have talked with Miss Regis, our early childhood director, and she has the capacity to do small group childcare, probably up to 125 students at each site if we needed to, which would be about half more of the students that were there. So if the student needed to roll into a childcare, we have the space and she has the staffing to be able to spread kids out in those small groups around the site. Now that is either a for pay or we do have some subsidized programs for that as well. So, and that could work the opposite. So it's extended childcare. So usually she's only there before school starts and after school ends, but she would be able to expand those hours. So for instance, if I was a student in that second grade classroom and I was in a PM classroom, I and my parent had to go to work, they could drop me off at childcare in the morning. I do childcare in the morning and then roll into my afternoon session. The other piece that we're pretty excited about in working with Ms. Regis is helping her staff really understand not the detail of every curriculum, but the kinds of things that kids are doing in class. And so if they are in either the morning or afternoon childcare, those preschool teachers and the childcare teachers could help the students do their independent work. And so it wouldn't be like I go to school, I go to childcare, I go home and I have to do my work, but they would be able to support that learning while the children were in their childcare setting. Does that make sense? Yeah. And so basically it's the same model for the hybrid, except kids would only come twice a week instead of 4 times a week. So we're really hoping that we can start at least at 2B with half the kids coming at one time. And then the rest of the model here is just if we're able to come back all together and then all together plus our large school events. So sort of like really back to normal. Back down to support services. So if we are in this hybrid model, the other idea is that our intervention teachers, special ed, would be able to schedule additional times. So if I'm a morning student and I need some additional special ed services or intervention services, I might get those in the afternoon. So I might have some extended time in small group on some additional days. Any questions about the elementary model? Okay.
Dr. Beatson, it's Stephanie. Can I add one thing to what you were saying in that model? Just in regards to the parent feedback that I shared earlier. We were working through this model with the design team, but we did actually go in and due to the feedback from the parent survey being AM PM was the choice model, and then the Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday instead of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We actually went back and tweaked some of that due to parent response. So,
and I just had a question for clarification. So when, in terms of looking at the models, how will you determine like which groups or who's going to be part of A or who will be part of B?
Great question. Our next step, once we kind of get the thumbs up from you all that we're heading in the right direction, I'm not sure the time frame on this, but we would survey the parents again. And this time have it be like a required, return this form and what's your preference? Is your preference morning? Is your preference afternoon? If we can only do a quarter, which is your preference on which days that you would be in, so that we could try to meet their needs as much as possible. So I would imagine that once we know kind of where we're heading with this, we can start trying to group kids in cohorts that work for families. Does that answer what you were asking?
It does. Thank you.
Yep. And then again, where we enter and how we move between these phases is really dependent upon what's happening health-wise in our county and in our state. Okay. And so Benicia Middle School had their team working on a draft model for the middle school. And again, all at home looks very similar, asynchronous and synchronous learning, types of things going on. And then we have the quarter of the students in school hybrid to a half. And so I'm going to walk you through the half again. if at the middle school, for half of the kids in class, they would either come Monday, Wednesday, or Tuesday, Thursday for a full day. So they wouldn't do a morning and afternoon, but they would come for a full day, which was in response, the preference of the feedback that we had received from the middle school. And that would put kids at about 16 to 18 kids in a classroom. And we'd have about 500 students on the campus at one time. One of the pieces that the middle school is really working hard at is looking at something called a 4x4 model. And this was for a few reasons. So let me explain what that is, and then I'll tell you the why behind it. So if I'm a student, I come to school on Monday, we're looking at saying, instead of taking 6 classes at a time, you take 4 in the fall and 4 in the spring. Except the difference is, this is sort of a modified 4x4. Ms. Dalsky and her team have figured out a way that kids would take English all year and math all year, and then in the fall they would either have science or social studies, and then they would either have PE or an elective. Okay, and that was really important to the middle school staff, because we're still building those foundational skills in mathematics and in English to make sure that we set them up with the most success to head off to the high school. The other thing that would happen here is they would have teachers available for drop-in support. So if I'm a student who is a Tuesday student and I'm trying to do my independent work, but I'm stuck, I could make an appointment with some staff on campus to come in and get some support on that, even though it wasn't my in-school day. And that would have to be in small groups. That's why we'd have to do it by appointment. And the reason this was really attractive to the middle school design team was because some of the feedback we heard from our very first survey was it was a lot for middle school kids to manage 6 classes when it wasn't all sort of, well, I think it's hard to manage 6 classes no matter what. But when it's half in person and half distance, or a quarter in person and 3/4 distance, or all distance, that got really tricky for kids to try to keep up and manage with 6 different teachers in 6 classes at one time. So this model really reduces some of that for the student. Lunch. Students would eat in school because they're there all day. They'd have designated zones and try to limit how many students are in each zone with social distancing. And on the days when the student wasn't in school, they would be doing their homework. Again, it wouldn't be Zooming and a lot of distance learning, because the teachers are teaching full time Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. They're teaching the opposite group that's coming in. So I would have done my 4 classes. I get my independent work. On the day I'm not in school, I would be home doing my additional reading and writing and math or science or whatever the subjects are, with the availability for either the call-in or drop-in support. And then Fridays, they're looking at being able to invite small groups back for additional reading and math intervention, counseling support and groups, and some intramurals possibly. So looking at ways to bring some small groups in on Fridays as well, while teachers are doing prep collaboration, professional learning, department meetings, follow-up phone calls with families. Some of that feedback time that we heard that was so important, that communication with families, all of that takes a lot of time. And then again, similarly with special ed and support services, on their off days, kids may be assigned small groups to come in and to continue to work on those skills and strategies that they need. Questions on the middle school proposal?
Yeah. What happens with the teacher preps? I mean, generally in middle school, you have a prep every day. Is there only certain days they would have preps? How does that work?
I think, and I think Lindsay's on this call.
Yes.
Yes, she is. I think they planned so that the teachers still get their prep. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, we have drafted a couple different schedules where we do incorporate a prep on Monday through Thursday in addition to the Friday prep.
Okay.
And yeah, we kind of floated that out with our department chairs. And so far they're receptive with that. Because we wanted to make sure we met that need, to make sure they were able to prep for their classes in addition to, managing the virtual support and responding to, parent and student emails.
Thank you. How about the elementary? Going back to that, was their prep that I believe it's 3 times a week that they get, or
They get, so fourth and fifth grade get 55 minutes twice a week. And
twice a week? I'm sorry. Okay.
Nope, and first through third gets 35 minutes once a week. And so what would happen is in the middle of the day, we need to have a bigger gap than a typical lunch for a couple of reasons. One is to give teachers time to prep and get ready for their next afternoon session, and a little bit of prep time there. And then also to do some cleaning.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
And then they would have Fridays. So that was, a
Right.
little bit of a trade-off as well. And knowing that some of this information has to get negotiated. We have to work with our partners in the teachers union, and we've had many of them on our committee as well, helping us think through what this would look like. Any other questions on the middle school before I move to the high school? Okay, so Benicia High School. This team has put together, again, column 1 is all at home or in distance learning. And the middle 2 columns are your quarter of a students and your half of a students coming in. Theirs is very innovative and exciting, and thinking about how we prep students to be really independent learners, but with lots of safety nets for support. And so they too are looking at a 4x4 semester model with students taking 4 classes in the fall and 4 classes in the spring, again, in blocks, to really help students be able to manage how many different subjects they're trying to take at one time. And so the way this one would work is that the teachers would teach and the students would have 2 days of or half of their classes. Let's see, how do I say it from the teacher perspective or the students? I'm going to tell you from the teacher perspective, and then I'll have to translate it to the student perspective. 2 days a week, a teacher would be teaching virtual online courses, and they are really ready to design robust online courses. And so students, there would be some synchronous and some asynchronous learning happening during those. And then 2 days a week, the teachers would have small group instruction for students who either sign up to come in, or that the teacher says, you need to come in because you may be struggling on something, or I need to work with you on something. Right now, the students and teachers at Benicia High School use something called Flex Time app, and they use that, they started using that right before we went out on school closure, to assign themselves, students use it to assign themselves to teachers for access support. So remember, they currently have an access period in their schedule, and students might say, you know what, I'm really struggling in science, and I want to make an appointment to go in during access period to meet with my science teacher. And so they can sign up during the using the Flex Time app to go in. So it's that same sort of idea where the students are either doing a virtual class with their teacher on one day, and the next day that teacher will offer small groups up to probably 4 different times during the day. So the student could sign up to say, I really want to go in and get support in math, and so I'm going to sign up for my math teacher's second block of small group instruction and get some extra help. But I'm doing fine in English and reading, so I don't need to sign up for that one. But there will be a lot of expectation, and the teachers are starting that next layer of how do they, what are the requirements? So kids have to go on to the synchronous Zooms at least X number of times. They have to come in at least X number of times so that there's that contact, and that teachers have requirements as well in terms of making student contact. The other thing teachers would have is office hours. Students would be required to meet with their teachers virtually or in person every week. And let's see what else. Oh, they were also planning on doing some additional spaces around campus with flex time appointments for people to sign up and say, I want to stay on campus. I need to work in a small but socially distant group on something, and we can go to the library or to different areas around campus. Did that make sense?
That does. I just had a question.
Sure.
Was any consideration given to students still be able to having the space where they would have the clubs and things like that, like if it's done virtually, or was
Where
there
they
any,
would have the what? I missed what you said. I'm sorry.
the clubs that students usually
Oh, the
have?
clubs. Yes. Yes. I believe all of that would happen. And there some of that's happening now, but I would imagine much of that would continue.
Leslie, is there any differentiation between the grade levels and how this is being implemented? You know, ninth graders versus 12th graders and contact time?
I have not heard that at this moment, but that's something I can bring back to the design group.
Yeah, it seems like this might be a productive schedule for some of the older students, but the younger ones might have more of a challenge with it.
Well, it could be that, right. An easy tweak would be what the requirement is for joining or checking in with your teachers.
Mhm. Yeah, contact time might be more for ninth graders than 12th graders.
Right. Yep, absolutely. I think that's a great suggestion. So that's basically the high school schedule. And again, these other pieces, they will have groups and things, and kids can sign up using their Flex Time app to come in to get counseling, to do other kinds of services that the school would provide. So that is Benicia High School.
So would there be any monitoring of students that are kind of wandering around the campus for these different groups and different times?
Yes. Kids have to have a place to be scheduled. And I think some of those details they're still working out. So what will it look like? So each small group would have a limited number, just because we're in, about half the students. So they'd be small in size. So if, and then kids would have to report to the place where they are supposed to be. The other thing that this team talked about was doing the schedule so that teachers who are next door neighbors, one of the teachers would be doing their virtual learning, while the teacher next door would have their small group time. And that would also limit students congregating and having too many kids in one particular area of the school, if that makes sense. Did I answer your question?
I think from one perspective about limiting the number of kids in each place, what was rolling through my head is that this is a lot of students coming and going at all different times. And who is monitoring what they're doing on campus, and if they are where they're supposed to be?
And I know yes, who's monitoring it? That is a question I need to find out. But I know that the Flex Time app, I believe you can print a report of who's supposed to be, where they're supposed to be, because that's how they can hold kids accountable and almost take attendance. So they can print off a report of, these are the students who are supposed to be in Mr. Earp's class at this time. Is that?
Uh-huh.
Who's going to do that? I don't know if it's going to be or principals or campus supervisors. I'm sure.
Or everybody.
Or everybody, right.
And then is there what about kids that don't have transportation and things like that?
I will find out the answer to that question. Typically, and I did talk to them about that, and they said typically it's not an issue. Kids are pretty capable. They jump on the bus, they get rides from other people. But I think that would be the other pieces to answer that. They'd have to get to school anyway. And they can then sign up to stay. If they need a ride home, they can just sign up to stay in one of those flex areas. So for instance, the library set up with social distancing. So if I go to a first block small groups in Mr. Earp's class and I don't have any others, but I have work to do, I could move to the library and continue to work almost like a study hall, I guess, on my work while I'm waiting for someone to come be able to pick me up.
I think it's a really interesting idea. I just know I have trouble college students being able to nail this. So I worry about some of the younger ones being able to nail this kind of a program. So
Right. And I know,
I'm sure there's lots of things to think through. So
right. And I know the team is really working on kind of thinking through all of those details at this time. And also trying to be responsive to some of the feedback. While some people really liked being able to pick and choose which the order of how they did their coursework and the how much they needed to be, and so trying to find that balance. The other piece that this team talked quite a bit about was knowing that some students in high school may need to be working more because of family situations, or helping with a younger sibling more, that this allows for some more of that flexibility. Dr. Gill, did you want to add anything? I know you sat in on this group quite a bit.
I think, Dr. Beatson, you shared majority of the information. Those are the questions. Some of those things were discussed, like the ones that Dr. Hogan asked. Not everything, but some of those things. And they still need to work on those type of details. But I do agree about the monitoring and also more structure for 9th grade as compared to 12th grade and so on, so we can make sure. And one conversation I do remember, because I was part of the break room for high school every time, that we discussed at length was the students, if somebody, teachers will monitor the grades closely and work with the counselors closely and the administrators. And specifically, if a student slips a grade, goes to D or an F, they will require those students to come in. So that's where teachers will, then that's through the Flex app, teachers can also sign the kids up. While the kids have that flexibility also. We also talked about the special education needs with special needs students, and as well as the EL students as well, to bring them in from the teacher's perspective.
So this is Diane Cush. I don't know if you remember, maybe you and Leslie can better clarify, but the other conversation that was going on with the high school team was the fact that because they're actually getting 8 blocks of learning per school year, which is more than they're getting now, it was also a great way to address students that needed to make up a class, because now they had some blocks in their schedule. They felt like that would be an advantage to students instead of waiting till summer or maybe another year to make up that class. And also that they had kids that really are interested in taking some either certification programs at the community college, or they're beginning classes at the college level. So now this gave some opportunities for that, where they weren't always looking to make exceptions for that. So the system had a lot of opportunities and potential built into the structure of doing the 4x4. I thought that was pretty exciting.
Yeah, thank you for remembering that.
Definitely correct, because students would be able to take 8 classes, which is equal to 80 units in a school year as compared to 60. And therefore, especially they focus on seniors, seniors who need to work or help take care of their younger siblings or something. They need to take less classes or even graduate early. So there's lots of flexibility and choice for the students from that perspective. In addition to being able to attend college classes as well.
Yeah, when we did the schedule committee several years ago, the 4x4 schedule was a really exciting option. A couple of things that we ran into with concerns with it is it requires additional teachers. And so how are we addressing that, in that in order to teach the full 8 counts, the full schedule, it required more teachers, if I recall correctly, because those teachers were teaching 8 classes instead of 6, basically.
Right. So that is not what they found when they actually mocked up the schedule.
Okay.
And so that was because before we even brought this here, we said we need to know that, because we're in a position to add. So they went and built the schedule and plugged, and that was not the finding.
Oh, good. Okay, good.
I don't know what changed from back then to now.
Probably the numbers a little bit.
Maybe the numbers.
Oh, that's true. It could have been that. So great. Yeah, it looks really interesting. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. And then
Anybody
Liberty,
else have any other, before you go on, anybody else have any other questions on the high school? Okay.
okay. And then Liberty High School, they did not block out a quarter of the students because they're small anyway and felt like they didn't need to do a quarter of the students, that they could jump right to half, which would put them between 10 and 12 students in a class at a time. And so they are looking at an AM/PM model where kids would be assigned. So right now in Liberty High School, students are all assigned an advisor teacher, and they meet in their advisory group. And so those are the groups that would come, those would be the cohorts that would come on campus either in the morning or in the afternoon. They would also have one of their teachers be able to do some synchronous learning in the on the opposite times. Because of their size, they're able to provide both, and have some drop-in support sessions. So somebody would be available every day to support students. So if they're in the morning, they needed to come in and get some extra support, they would have that option as well. I know, because yes, this was Monday through Thursday. So the kids would come twice a week, and so they would have the synchronous, sorry, that's right. They would come twice a week on campus, and then they would also do a blend of virtual and synchronous learning on those opposite times. That makes sense? And that was their schedule. And again, the rest of this all stays the same with virtual learning and providing support groups for students and so forth. The other thing for them is on Friday, it would be a non-instructional, like independent work day, but they would also have their wellness center and support rooms available for students if they needed to, by appointment, come in. And so lots of that happening across the district is finding ways to open up those spaces and small groups for kids that need that support, regardless of what the schedule ends up being. So that's the Liberty High School schedule. Any questions? Okay. I'm going to go back here then. Whoopsies. Hold on. What happened? I just learned how to use the clicker in the district office, and now I'm going crazy with the, here we go. Okay. So in addition to meeting with the design team, we've been meeting with our Director of Maintenance and Operations, Mr. Romero, and our school district nurse, Miss Dean, around all of the information out there around health and safety. So I want to take just a few minutes to walk you through. Again, this is our thinking at the time, and it changes, as you know, very quickly with new ordinances and regulations that come out. So we will continue to update this as new information comes out. But right now, our recommendations, our practice is going to be that we're going to recommend that families take temperatures before coming into school. And if any student has a fever, that they're asked to stay home. And then students and adults should also screen themselves for any sort of respiratory symptoms. And so we really want to inform our parents about what they should be looking for, and then our staff as well. And so safety at school. And this, again, was based on 6.5, the guidance that was released on June 5th. And so social distancing. And so classrooms will be arranged so that there's 6 feet between and around desks. And that may look, we just had another call with Mr. Romero today. One of the ways that may happen is we may leave all the furniture, say in a elementary school classroom, in a second grade classroom, they may have their 26 desks, and kids would sit in the AM session, every other desk that would be 6 feet apart. And then the PM session would come in and they would sit in those desks that weren't sat in the morning. And so that's one way to not worry so much, like every student would have his or her own workspace and not be having kids share desk areas. We will be using ground markers. We won't be using play structures at this time. Recess we'll be working on figuring out how to do games and activities that require less contact. For instance, at the elementary schools, we might say, which is usually a no-no, we might say you can bring something to do at recess because we're not going to be able to do a lot of sharing. We will be restricting visitors, volunteers, community groups. We won't be opening our buildings to that at this point in time. There's just too many other factors to consider to do that. And then we may have to use some physical barriers like plexiglass dividers in some areas. And actually, Mr. Romero's already putting them in, like at the office. So if a parent has to come in, there's a plexiglass barrier between the office staff and the parent. They've done, and I just have to give a shout out, they have done an amazing job sifting through all of the detail and coming up with what can we do to keep our kids as safe as possible. Personal hygiene and wellness. So all staff will be trained. There's a new training out on COVID-19 and how to reduce risk. We're going to encourage people to stay home when they're sick. We will teach and reinforce hand washing, covering your sneeze, all of those types of things. We have hand sanitizer and hand washing stations coming into schools and around schools, and a lot for classrooms. One of the things we've talked about was having first aid supplies in the classroom, so that would limit students needing to go to the office if they got just a minor injury that could be taken care of in the classroom. But if students do need to come into the office for a skin, something bigger, an illness or an injury, that we would have a separate area set up for them so that we wouldn't be putting kids together. Requiring hand washing before eating, sneezing, after being outside, after using the restroom, all of those types of things. Right here, and I know these are things that we're still in conversation. At the moment when we wrote this, we were saying all staff and students are recommended to wear face coverings. We are getting some from the state to supply to our teachers for at least the beginning part of the school year, and we will need to know, and staff and students, I believe, and we will need to know what that sort of, actually, I don't know if that's true, if it's for students as well. I'll have to get back to you on that. Definitely for teachers. And then we'll have to look at what that looks like. Now, that has just changed with today's news of required face masks, and so we don't know if that will need to change for us as well. I do want to say that regardless of if this continues to stay recommended or if it changes to required, we do know that there are some students who won't be able to wear a face mask for some reasons, and we will make those accommodations. And the same is probably true for adults if they have asthma or so forth and they can't do that. I already talked about separate areas for students who are ill. One of the things that we'll need to partner with our parents on is if a student gets sick at school, that they need to be able to come right away or send someone right away to pick them up, that we won't have the capacity to have them, because sometimes, especially at the younger grades, it'll take parents a long time to come, and we really need to have this system set up where as much as possible people can pick up their children who are ill right away. If it's required, we will do no touch thermometers prior to school entry, and isolation procedures when students get sick, and health will notify health services of any reported cases of COVID. And we take our direction from the county about when and how notification happens to the rest of the class or the school, just as if there were head lice in the elementary school. There's a particular protocol that happens, and we get that information from the public health department. Cleaning and disinfecting, and so our maintenance team is amazing, and they're ready to do whatever needs to be done. So classrooms will be disinfected as communal and flat surfaces between student use as much as possible. One of the things we did talk about, so I already kind of explained the elementary thought right now, which is kids would sit at every other desk, so there would be no sharing of surfaces during the school day, and then in the evening the classrooms would be fully cleaned using all of their disinfecting protocols. At the middle school, what we were talking about today, because kids would be, and potentially at the high school, rotating through classes, and that's a really hard thing at secondary to not have happen because kids take different classes, is this idea of some sort of work mat, like almost or a tablecloth, but more like a work mat, the old blotters where kids would come and they would have their own work mat that would go on the desk. And so then they would take it with them and go to their next class. And so that was one way to help minimize cross-contamination if kids have to sit at the same desk. So that's something that we're exploring, but was an idea that we just came up with today. Because the reality is we won't be able to get into every single classroom between every single class to clean every single desk and chair. And so we were trying to think of how can we minimize any sort of germ spread. And so one idea was if kids just walk in and they put this blotter or something down on their workspace, and then they take that with them. So that was our latest idea on that. Mr. Romero has bought people safe UV lights that he's looking to put in bathrooms, and what that will do is expose if there's any bacteria, and as they do more frequent daily cleaning and disinfecting, so that people will go through the bathrooms on a more frequent basis to clean, they'll be able to see through those lights where it does need to be cleaned. Other things, supplies and materials won't be shared, so we're already talking with teachers about what is it that you need to teach and how do we make individual baggies, if you will, at the elementary school of manipulatives and things like that, and then not sharing textbooks, and if we do, they'd have to get wiped down in between once that happens. Other big things, keeping windows and doors open as much as possible, because that fresh air has, from all the recommendations that we have seen, is really helpful in dissipating any germs. No drinking fountains except for no-touch water bottle fill stations. And then the other thing is Mr. Romero said he can turn up the fresh air part of the cooling system, which it will draw in more fresh air than we typically have it set at. That's a good thing in terms of dissipating any germs. The problem is the rooms may not get as cool in hot weather because the HVAC wouldn't kick on as heavy. This picture right here is a mock-up his team did of 16 desks in an elementary school classroom, which is that half of a classroom, half of the older students. And those desks are more than 8 feet apart with 16. So we feel like we can fit that many students in very safely. And if we needed to put all the desks back in, we could stagger them in such a way so there'd be about 6 feet in between. Food services, as much as possible, if the weather permits, eating outside. So even in small groups, socially distant, would be the best, instead of having kids come into the cafeteria, which is not recommended. And staying in the classroom poses a problem at the elementary school because we want to be able to get in and do some cleaning in between the AM and PM shift. We won't be doing the food sharing tables. Kids are not going to be allowed to share any food and drink, and we're going to monitor that as best as possible. Courtney will offer food at school for the days when students are in school, and we'll be able to continue pick-up locations. The piece that we don't know is if we are going to be able to continue free meals for everyone like she's been doing this spring. And if not, families can sign up for free and reduced lunch using her process there. We've talked about social emotional wellness and support. And so things that we are really looking to have ready for the start of school are our wellness centers. And so we have them at almost every school site where students can access either in person or virtually support through the wellness center. And so under Dr. Corona's advice and supervision, we're working on getting that set up with Ms. Garcia. Counseling groups, so our counselors have already done some small groups and continuing that either in person or virtually. And then social emotional learning. And so we're looking at social emotional curriculum as well as trauma-informed care types of training for teachers so that they're ready and prepared to support our students when they come back. The other pieces that really make social emotional wellness happen is continuing to do spirit days and spirit weeks. And we know that happened virtually this year, but even if that has to happen virtually, just trying to continue that school spirit component. And then there is one thing down here on my screen that I can't see. And it has to do with the Flex app and having kids take some control over their schedule and having that flexibility. One of the things that you had asked for before at our last meeting or 2 meetings ago, I believe, was what had been happening up to this point for wellness support, and then what do we think about into the future. And so Ms. Corona has surveyed her staff on what went well in terms of working with students in a supporting mode and what did not. And so what went well is just continuing family support, connections with students, sending reminders to parents, having schedules, just having the relationships were already established, so small groups seemed to go better. And what didn't work is not having parent permission for everyone, trying to keep student interested in participating in small groups, and student motivation and some attendance issues, and not being able to make that personal connection was difficult. And so these are some options for social emotional support as we move forward. And she has put them in, if we're fully virtual, if we have a partial return, that's the hybrid, and on full return and what it would look like. And so doing counseling in a lot of different ways, both again in person and virtually, and how that would happen, and then the types of things that would happen in a wellness room. That's the stuff on the left side of the screen, and then the right side would be around identifying a social emotional curriculum that staff would use, and then what it would look like and how it would be implemented, and then sources of strength, which is a great peer support group for our 6th through 12th graders, and special friends continuing for our littles at the elementary school. So, and I've talked a little bit about this, so I'm not going to spend too much time on preschool. And then the next slide is childcare. But Ms. Regis, our director, has really worked hard with her staff and with others around the district to come up with a plan for resuming preschool on whatever schedule, elementary schedule we come up with as well. So again, individualized lunches, no family style, individualizing materials, doing daily health checks, frequent cleaning of classrooms, and then childcare. And I talked about this earlier, is this ability to expand during our phased in model. And so that is well in the works of planning as well. And that's the end of my presentation right now. I feel like I've talked at you a whole lot. Please let me know if you have any questions.
I had a couple questions. Number one, it goes back to the health and wellness. If you're going to have somebody at an entrance taking everyone's temperature when they come in, is every school basically there's only one entrance in and out? I mean, so like you wouldn't have people going in from different places?
We have talked about having a few likely designated entrance and exit spots. We probably would want more than one if possible, to limit congestion, but not have every entrance open.
Right.
And we're taking recommendations. So right now we haven't made a decision about whether or not we would need to do temperature checks for everyone. We were waiting to see what the county told us we needed to do at that time. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, you're right. And I was just thinking that, you know how there's a lot of kids that tend to show up like right before school starts, and then they're in a line to get their temperature taken, and, you know, you can see the hassle. I'm not saying it's not necessary, but I'm saying that, you know, we got to plan for that and say, okay, might be a lot of kids coming in a few minutes late or whatever.
Right. And then
go ahead.
I'm sorry, we would need, I know that our nurse, Miss Dean, has begun to get some of those thermometers, or has a plan to, and there might even be ways that other people can help. So it wouldn't just be one person, but we've got a couple office staff, or, you know, different locations that would happen if that needed to be an action that we took.
And yeah, that was my next question, is everyone's got jobs already. Whose job is it going to be to do the temperatures? And then the second one, because I always think, you know, being a junior high teacher and how kids, you know, lines when they eat, and you talked about everyone washing their hands, and there's limited amount of places to wash your hands, and so I'm like, oh man, at lunch you're going to have these big old lines, after they eat, if you're going to enforce it, which you would have to enforce it, because I can only speak for junior high, but those kids aren't going to go on their own to wash hands.
No, and that's where I think part of it is as you enter, I mean, what I envision is sort of like you enter the next class and the teacher or someone is there perhaps with, see the, this hand sanitizer.
Hand sanitizer. I was thinking that would be better.
Yeah.
Than,
So we'll have
yeah.
both, but hand sanitizer for sure. And I know we're in the process of kind of stockpiling is probably a bad word for now, but really gathering that up so that we have a lot of it.
That's awesome. And then we're just going to have to think about like getting the kids. The last piece is, if masks are necessary or required, I don't even know if there's some we could even say here, but you're going to have kids that are going to battle wearing the mask, even if they don't have a health issue. And
I know.
What are we going to do? I'm not wearing no mask.
I know the level of detail around all of this is amazing.
The level that what you just showed is amazing. What you guys were able to get done is absolutely amazing. I really appreciate that.
The team has been phenomenal. And then
every
time you think you solve one thing, you uncover like 4 or 5 other things. The story I told to the team was when we lived in Vermont, a friend of mine gave me a beautiful ceramic sink from Mexico. And so I asked my husband, I said, can you install this in the bathroom? And so he started to take it apart and realized there was a leak under the sink. And then we ended up with a new floor, 6 feet of new foundation, and a new roof. And that's sort of what this feels like, is every time we solve something, it's like, okay, but what about? Trying to, as best as we can, mitigate. It's not 100%, but
appreciate it. It was great.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Information.
Okay, if anybody doesn't have any more questions or comments, can we call for a motion to support their plan so they can continue on with that next level of detail and can keep themselves going?
I move that we absolutely support the great work that they're doing so they can keep going. I move that we do support it.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none? Keep going.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I couldn't have asked for a better team. They're doing amazing work. So thank you. They'll be thrilled to know that we can continue down this path, knowing that we may be back with something that looks
totally
a little different as we get closer. So thank you.
Okay, well, Dr. Beatson and Ms. Rice are not finished yet because 13.4 is consideration and approval of the COVID-19 written operations report.
Yes. So attached in your board packet is the actual report. So I'm going to share my screen again. This is an action item, as you know. What I did was I took the major components and the highlights of the actual written report, which I said is attached to your board packet, and I put it into a PowerPoint just to walk you through what's in it. And so this is all because of changes in the LCAP requirements for this school year and then into the future. And so I think I brought this to you at one of our other board meetings. The regulation and changes for the LCAP that we were in the midst of planning for 2020 to 2023 has been paused. And in its place, I'm bringing to you the COVID written report, which is really a summary. It's a narrative summary of the work we've done through distance learning. And there were several questions that we needed to answer, and I'll walk you through what's in there. And so basically this is in lieu of the LCAP, what I would have been bringing to you tonight. And then just a reminder, sometime over the summer, we hope to get the next direction for a 2020 to 2021 LCAP, a one-year LCAP that I will need to bring to you for approval by December 15th. And then after that, we'll get the 2021 to 2024 three-year LCAP going. So this is just the sort of interim operations report. So the first question that we had to address was an overview of the changes we needed to make and the impacts of school closure. And so the report outlines what our initial goal was to keep students engaged and supported. I wrote about how daily instruction has taken many different forms this past spring, that teachers had daily office hours, that specialized academic instructions and related services were offered in a variety of different ways, virtually, online, or how do you say that word? I can't even say it. Telephonically. And then all the conversations we had around grading and then the adjustments we made to board policy. So that was the narrative to talk about that question. The next question was talking about a description of how we met the needs of our students who are English learners, foster youth, and low income. And remember, those are our students that the state has put into the unduplicated category and who we receive our supplemental funding for. So we continue to provide small group instruction in ELD, even though it was virtually. We staff at all levels monitored student success and struggles closely and did additional outreach, especially to our families that fell into those categories. At some of our sites, personal phone calls and delivery of technology to those families was made to their homes, or instructional materials was delivered. We continued with counseling and special friends groups. We did surveys to make sure that our families had devices and reported that 99% of our students had access to those devices and 97% had reliable internet. So we continue to do outreach and provide technology when we needed to. And then even most recently, Ms. Rice facilitated a wonderful district English language parent advisory committee, so a DLAC, around what was working and what did we need to consider into the future. The third question that we needed to respond to was a description that we've taken to what did our instruction continue to look like. And so this was basically where I wrote about the story of our closure, how we created Google Classrooms for every teacher, and that Clever was the one-stop online portal to have students access all of our online programs. So it was kind of a login approach. How we used surveys, that teachers, before we even left on that day in March, had their students log into their new Google Classrooms to make sure that that wasn't a barrier. We talked about what instruction looked like for the first 2 weeks of school, when we thought we were only in a 2-week closure, which was really just around review. And when we realized it was going to be longer, we worked with our teachers to identify those essential standards, provided extra resources to families, and that we shifted to expect that new content focused on those essential standards was going to be provided and taught Mondays through Thursdays, with Fridays being an independent work day. And that we started our future planning this May for the fall. The next question talked about providing school meals and how were we able to do that. And so in this section, I wrote about the wonderful work that Miss Courtney did with her team around providing breakfast and lunch meals from 2 of the school sites and then a neighborhood site, and that they were able to get meals during spring break. And they provided a hot meal each day for families, and they had about 450 breakfasts and 450 lunches that they served every day. And how they did that through setting up drive-through areas. We had staff go out and direct traffic, and that was rotating the staff to work from home on some days while taking some online professional development classes, and then working out in the field, serving 4 days a week. And that our maintenance staff partnered very well with us, that the food service personnel were so great. They were participating in Spirit Weeks, the virtual Spirit Week, so they would dress up and greet the cars. And the families were so appreciative of this, and they did thank you cards and gift cards and dropped off flowers to our workers. So they were so appreciative of that. And the last question that we had to address in this interim report was about, oh no, I'm sorry, second to last question. Nope, this was the last question. Supervision of students during ordinary school hours. And so while we never did open up our before and after school childcare, at this point we did work closely with our county, First Five Solano, Solano Families and Children, and Neighborhood City. So we were able to direct families that needed that childcare to other services that were available right close by in our county. And then, as you heard, I think it was just at our last meeting, we will do a summer gradual reopen with camps and CDU this summer. So next steps is we're going to continue working with the school design team. We will continue to communicate with families, and then we'll start planning for our LCAP for next year once we know exactly what it looks like. Any questions on this interim report?
No,
I just want to thank you. My head, I've got the Tasmanian devil going in my head going, oh my God, how did they put all these pieces together? Great job.
Well, thank
all
you.
of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. It feels like we just had a summary of this whole last semester of school. It was pretty amazing. So if there's no other questions or comments, can I call for an approval of, let's see, the COVID-19 written operations report?
I move that we approve the COVID-19 operations report as stated.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the report is passed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It will go off to our county now, and then we will also post it on our website. So thank you very much.
Woo-hoo, thank you. Okay. All right. Next up for action is consideration and approval of the 2021 budget for the Benicia Unified School District. Mr. Rahill.
Hi, good evening, everyone. We do have our school budget before you tonight for your action to approve. We have been updating you on the budget since May 28th at our public hearing of the budget. We provided additional information on June 4th, as well as last week on June 11th. And so tonight we are asking you to approve our budget for next year. It is based on the best information that we have at this point in time. Basically, the governor annually comes out with a May revision budget that we use to put together our school budget. What's going on right now at the state is the state legislature has acted upon their own state legislative budget, which is quite different than the governor's May revision budget. And so the governor is working with the state legislature to see if they can come up with one final budget that the governor is comfortable signing before a June 30th deadline. Now, it is possible that the governor won't sign a budget and he'll veto what the state legislature has passed on to him. And in that case, the budget deadline would be extended probably into July. But we're hopeful that the governor and the state legislature of California can work out a state of California budget, which we will then use that information and come back to you probably in the latter part of July with an update. In any case, we're required, all school districts in California are required to pass a budget based on the best information they have. And we're using the governor's May revised budget, which at this point, it includes the financial crisis that's been caused by the coronavirus, COVID-19, and the fiscal impact that has had on our state of California's economy, which trickles down to all the public agencies that depend on the state of California, basically the tax revenues. And so what I will do is I have our pie charts and financial information. It is what we've seen in the past, and I'll go through them. If I'm going too quick, please slow me down, but it's very similar information that what we've seen over the last month. And basically, We have key fiscal factors that we look at with each budget. Number one, we start with our known salary related costs from our increases on our salary schedules, as well as increases in our retirement systems. Our other revenues and expenses, we look at a funding reduction with our special ed funds, as well as this point in time, we just have a one-time federal CARES funding of about
Mr. Rahill, can I interrupt you for a minute?
Sure.
You didn't share the screen with us, so
I am so sorry. Let me do that.
that's okay.
Thank you for letting me know that.
Thank you.
Okay, and basically, I had just started with our key fiscal factors. Is what is the first slide here with our known salary-related costs for our salary schedules and retirement systems. We look at other revenues and expenses of funding reduction of special ed of about $344,000, and at this point in time, we've only had official acted upon federal funding of about $192,000. I'm going to scroll down. School districts are funded based on the funding method called LCFF, Local Control Funding Factor. It's based on the number of kids that are enrolled and attend your schools. And Benicia Unified, like almost every other school district in the state, we've been declining enrollment. And you can see that we're projecting a decline over the next 3 years. So that will impact our funding. We look at how we can adjust our staff with less students, and we adjust staff as best we can over those years. And number 5 is a cost of living adjustment that gets applied to our state funding. At this point, unfortunately, it is a negative number, a negative 7.92%, which gets applied, which means we'll be getting less money than what we got last year. And that is about $3.5 million when you look at the reduction in funds as well as our declining enrollment. So when we have this multi-million-dollar hit to our budget, our stance is we want to address this over several years and put together a multi-year plan with potential budget cuts over the next 3 years at least, and starting with the target of about $2 million for the 2021 year. We are reminded one of our biggest costs are our retirement contributions, and so we monitor that closely. We get a short break for 1 or 2 years, and then it catches back up in the third outer year. For our 2020-21 budget, our revenues are going to be at about $45.3 million. Most of that in the pie chart you can see is from the state of California, with a little bit coming in from the federal and local agencies. We also put together our expenditure budget. School districts in California providing education, a majority of their budget is made up of the salary and benefits for the people that teach the kids and serve the kids. And so right now with our budget put together, it's about 90%. And the other 10% is used for supplies and services for the operations of the district. So our budgeted amount for expenditures is about $47.8 million. There's a big caveat here is that we are including that $2 million target of budget cuts. And so right now, since there's a big difference between the state legislative budget and the governor's May revised budget, and they're trying to work out a deal before June 30th, is we want to come back to the school board, like I said earlier, in the later part of July, once we have a final budget, and determine exactly what that means for the school district and see whether or not that would impact the level of budget cuts, at least for the 2021 school year. We look ahead and see what our fund balance would be at the end of the school year. And right now we are projecting that to be $6.5 million, which includes a state minimum reserve, as well as our local board policy reserve. And then we do have some carryovers for monies that have accumulated and are one-time in nature. So with that, we put together a scenario that we shared over the past few weeks because we're talking about budget cuts, which we haven't talked about since the Great Recession 10 years ago or so. And this is a 3-year plan with no budget cuts. And basically, given the current financial assumptions, basically we only have 1 year in 2021 of being positive. And without doing anything, again, this is just a scenario. This is not what we're proposing. In the outer years, we go negative. And when that happens, the county and the state gets involved. And obviously they start procedures for takeovers and mandates for a district. So this is a scenario that shows how fast things can go bad without some sort of plan. So this does provide for our state minimum reserve and the board policy reserve. We're just reminded why a district maintains a reserve. It's a critical responsibility for a sound budget, protects us from unforeseen circumstances. And basically, when you combine the board policy reserve with the state minimum reserve, it's really only 1 month of district payroll. So that's the equivalent of what that dollar amount is. In addition to those reasons, here's a long list of why you maintain a reserve. One of the big reasons that helps a district is when the state of California issues IOUs to school districts. And so right now that is being proposed by the governor. And it's also a backup plan for the state legislative plan where the state would not pay us, but they call it a cash deferral, but it's like a state IOU. And with this chart up, basically what they do, instead of paying you 1 month, they give you an IOU and pay you the next month, as they will this month in June to July. But really the bigger hit to us will be towards the end of the year, April, May, and June. That's 3 months worth of our monthly apportionments getting delayed or an IOU issued us to July or even later. So this is the governor's May revise. He is proposing, in order to put his California budget together, to do these cash flow deferrals, these IOUs. And right now, if under the state legislative budget, they're proposing that the state record some future possible federal revenues that have not been approved or even discussed yet. And their plan, as a backup plan, if those federal revenues never came, it would basically about double the amount of IOUs as their backup plan. And so that would be a tremendous hit to our district and really force us to borrow funds to make our monthly payroll. So if I can go back to the charts, a big reason to keep that reserve is cash flows and IOUs, as well as everything else on the list here. We can't forget that California has been subject to other natural disasters like fires and air quality and earthquakes. And, right now we're in the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic and other things it's possible to come up. So the more reserve you have, the more you're protected. Our multi-year summary, again, we're required to do it for 3 years, and we did extend it out for 2 years just to show what, using the best information that we have, to show that our work isn't ended just after these 3 years. And up at the top here is our annual operating deficit, which shows even with these budget cuts under these assumptions, we continue to operate at a deficit, but at least we're picking away at it. And in doing so, the bottom part here with our projected fund balance shows how we maintain the state minimum reserve and our board policy reserve. But at some point, when you're dealing with the magnitude that we're going to be dealing with, it is possible And in this scenario, the board policy reserve does start getting used in the outer year. So we need to monitor that closely. Each year as we update that, we can update our numbers and show that impact. But the goal would be to maintain the state minimum reserve as well as the board policy reserve. So in doing that, we shared this last Thursday, and more to come after we have a state final budget. We'll come back in late July and provide more input about this. But we've categorized our draft of our budget considerations into 3 main groups. We have employee unions. We hope to continue conversations and discussions with them, all of our employee groups, see if there's some negotiable items that we might be able to have some savings on. There's also the possibility of the state allowing for some summer layoffs. We're required to provide layoff notices to some of our employees, but in certain circumstances, they might allow us to do that over the summer as well. We have identified some other positions, either through attrition or retirements, people that have left the district. There are some layoffs involved that would be needed to come up with this $1,100,000 number. Again, we'll come back in the later part of July with more information on that, and as well as to try to do some reductions and savings in our supplies and services and maintenance area. So here's our target for 2021. It's a summarized list and more detail to come in July. With that, I kind of wrap it up with this last set of slides. Each time we need to certify our budget, we've been in communications with our County Office of Education, and basically we are upfront with them that we have the state minimum reserve in our budget, which is a big deal. And but at this point, it's more of a qualified budget versus a positive budget, just given the magnitude of all of the unknowns. So the most concerning certification would be a negative certification, which means that the district will not be able to meet its obligations. And at least according to this multi-year budget cut plan, we have a plan. Not every detail is worked out at the moment, but there's a plan, and we have some time to do that. So we would qualify our budget. These are just a couple summary slides. We're reminded we get most of our funding from the state, from the local control funding formula. If the governor's May revise is enacted, it's now about $8,400 per student. As Dr. Beatson just mentioned on the item before this, we'll come back with you in the probably later part of the fall to bring back our local control accountability plan, which is like our district strategic plan. And one more reminder about the state IOUs. We will monitor that very closely. And our next step is obviously presenting this to you tonight, asking you for your approval of the budget, knowing that we'll come back in the later part of July with an update. We forward this on to the County Office of Ed and the State Department of Education. And with that, that concludes my presentation for our 2021 school budget.
Thank you, Mr. Rayhill. Does anyone have any questions for Tim at this time?
I did have one question. And I understand that once the state passes their budget, we have like 45 days that we have to review and repass ours, correct? Then does it have to go back to county again?
What we do is we're required within 45 to communicate the impact of the budgets, of the final budget. We don't come back with the official state report. We do the calculations about what the impact of the final budget is. The next time you see an official report would be after we close the books in, I believe it's September. So, but you will know you will know the financial impact of the final state budget. And so what we can do is we can update the pie charts and the spreadsheets that you're used to seeing to show what that impact would be.
I think that would be great. Right. Anybody else have any other questions? Okay, I'm going to call it this time for a motion to approve the budget as it's been presented tonight.
I move that we approve the budget as presented.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the budget is approved. Thank you, Mr. Rahil. I know you've been working hard on this because we keep throwing questions at you regularly.
Thank you.
So that concludes all of our items on our agenda tonight. I just want to remind everybody that there will not be a board meeting next Thursday. We are actually free, I believe, until around the middle of July. Is that correct? So we have a couple of Thursdays off before we have to resume, and we'll be talking about money when we come back again. I'd also like to just take a really quick minute and just thank everybody, our staff, especially for the amazing planning and work they're doing to get our kids back in school again this fall, and all of the detail that's going into it. So lots of energy and lots of time supporting both our teachers and our staff and our kids, because teachers are asking what they could be doing over the summer to kind of get themselves ready as well. And a real big thank you to our families. That was a pretty overwhelming response. I was really proud to see all of those people responding like that, when we know we're working really hard to make sure that we can accommodate their needs as well. So with that said, I'm going to say good evening until July, and our meeting is adjourned.